about myself. Barrel model of culture and cultural study areas, cultural traditions. This one would be on contributions, tribal sovereignty, casinos, personalities, Dakota Nation breakdown in cultural traditions, eagle feathers, and star quilt. And then next week, I'm setting up at this point tribal government operations, poverty, cultural appropriation, including mascots and product packaging, and cultural traditions, celebrations, powwows, and music. So we'll see where this takes us. Part 2, revisiting American Indians. Personal background, growing up Indian. My mother moved off the Rosebud Reservation when I was a baby, taking me with her to Rapid City, South Dakota. Mom was born and raised on the Rosebud and went to boarding school at a place called Ideal. That's where I was born. This is my mom as a child. She's at the bottom left, dressed in white. She had 4 sisters. The oldest sister is kind of a little darker there, standing next to the man. And then the man's holding a baby and the 2 young other sisters in between.
Excuse me, Eugene, we are not seeing a picture at this time.
Of anything?
No.
Do you see this? Do you see the words?
No, I don't. Are you in share screen?
No, I am not. But I also have to figure out how to get out of this part.
Okay.
Get into this part. See, I knew there's a reason why you're here. Let's see, share screen here.
There we go. Now it's starting.
Okay.
There, now we have it.
So I basically said nothing.
Well, you said it, but we just didn't see it.
Well, that's a shame. This is good stuff. Okay, so I apologize. Are we ready? Try it again. You've been through that. Been through part 1, been through part 2. Make a real quick look here. Part 3. Starting 2nd week. Okay, this is the one where I have to move. I think I can, there we go. This works for me, so now I can actually see everything.
Okay.
Let's see. Are you seeing that slide?
Yes.
And this one, reservation to Rapid City?
Yep.
Okay, moving ahead. So my mom was moved off the reservation and took me with her when she was quite young. She was raised on the Rosebud, and she went to a boarding school at a place called Ideal, and that's where I was born. So this is a picture of my mom. Do you see her now, the picture?
Yes, we do. Yep.
Okay, she's at the bottom left, and she's got white. There's actually a little arrow that I kind of use a marker to point to her there. And the 2 middle sisters, they both died when they were in adolescence. And the reason the one has her head kind of cut out in this rectangle, that was her obituary picture.
Oh.
And when I had this, photos are extremely hard to come by on the reservation. And when this, when my mom had this, I don't even know how she got it. When I had it redone, the photo place said they could Photoshop it, or fix it so that you wouldn't see those lines. And I decided, no, this is part of what it's all about. So that sister and the one sitting next to my mom, they both died when they were children. And the oldest sister is almost 20 years older than my mother. So she was the one that seemed to have more information about our family life. And then the baby, that was Aunt Vera. Didn't really see her very much. Once Mom moved off the reservation, didn't see many of these relatives except for the older aunt. Her name was Effie. So I grew up in Rapid City since she moved away. Mom had another child, my brother, soon after moving to Rapid City, and then she later met and married an airman. There's an Air Force base in Rapid, and they got married in 1952, and together they had my two sisters. The person I called Dad adopted me and my brother. This is a picture of my mom and my dad in 1952. This is taken kind of on a farm that where my Aunt Effie and her husband lived. It's actually more like a ranch near Winter, South Dakota. And Ideal is only about 7 or 8 miles from Winter, South Dakota. So growing up, I had few Indian relatives since my mom's only relatives were Aunt Effie and Aunt Vera. And Aunt Vera was on the reservation. We just never got there very much. There were no grandparents, so I had nobody to talk to about background and history on my family side. And my dad was raised in Buffalo, New York. And because he was raised Catholic and he moved to, he was assigned on the Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota in Rapid City when he married my mother, who was obviously either divorced or with child. And according to the Catholic tradition, he couldn't be in the church anymore. So he ended up becoming Episcopalian. Well, he was still kind of an outcast in the 50s, even among white people. He's married to an Indian woman. And in South Dakota, that's Indian-white relations were pretty rare. So my Indian connections came from my mother and from the Indian people who were in our Episcopal church, which was, it's known as a mission church, supported by the general Episcopal church in the state because the Indian people had no money. So culture is learned, and I was exposed to my culture, but not specifically taught my culture. My mother would not teach me to speak Lakota, and that's because in boarding school she was punished if she spoke her language. And she kind of just assumed when I was going to school that that was probably still true in South Dakota. So she wouldn't she wouldn't teach me the language. And I always remembered I hated that because she'd be on the phone with some member of our church talking about something in English, and they get to the juicy parts and she'd switch to Lakota just to make me realize I couldn't understand what was really going on. We did eat some cultural foods, but you have to realize that my dad was Polish Czech. So we had a variety of different kinds of cultural foods, even though we were all poor. My mom would still have this hankering for what I would call Indian foods, Dakota foods. And for the most part, I could handle most of that. A lot of things were commodity foods. But every once in a while, she'd get into tripe soup, which I never did develop a taste for. My dad, on the other hand, he liked bologna and pepperonis and just other stuff that to this day, I find myself vacillating between that parsnip, turnip, potato soup that I thought, is so bland, but he seemed to like it. And when I was about 8 years old, we moved out of the Rapid city limits into a little addition that had about 7 homes in about 20 acres. And that took us away, pretty much located near the center of town. So we were poor, but that has its own cultural traits, and I'll talk about that in part 3. So I was separated from the Indian community once we moved out of town, even though we're only about 3 miles from the city limits. Raised by a white man who just happened to like Indian culture. And it never occurred to me that he wouldn't. Even today, when I think back on it, he always did like learning about the Indian stuff and the things my mom would teach him or the people in church would teach him. He was oftentimes the only white person in our church. And I'm attending an Indian church full of Indian people, Indian families, Indian kids. And we went up to 3 times a day on Sunday. Morning service, 11 o'clock service, and the night service, 7:30 p.m., which became very cultural because there were always potlucks or gatherings after church of that Indian community there. and a lot going on that, as I later learned, was cultural. The differences I saw were I had Sunday school playmates who, by the time 9th grade and 10th grade came and we moved on to high school, they were gone. I just never saw them. And they became dropouts or pushouts. And the number of Indian kids that I knew personally or that I had seen became less visible to me as an adolescent. And as I went into high school, I very seldom saw any kids who were Indian. Graduating from high school, I found myself even more isolated. My class, my graduating 12th grade class in Rapid City, South Dakota in 1966 was 723 seniors. And there were about a dozen Indians. And those Indian kids like myself, most of them were not from Rapid City. They had actually moved to Rapid from some of the reservations in order to graduate from a school because they were intending to go on to college or move forward with their lives. So out of that dozen or so kids, I only knew about 3 of them. And there weren't any of those students who were actually at my church. They were from those 3 that I knew. They were from some other parts of the community. My friends were all white. To this day, the vast majority of my friends continue to be white. But I did have a great deal of support from my teachers. I'm not sure exactly why that was true. I think about that even now at my age. They went out of their way in many cases to make sure I was always given self-confidence and be able to grow in that and to be successful. I went to college. I didn't know that, it never occurred to me how I was going to pay for it because my family certainly couldn't pay for it. They had no money. Somewhere along the way, that literally in August of, before, probably June, July, I applied for money from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, not knowing what that meant. And today, having a much better knowledge about how you go about getting money to go to school, I received a grant. Not a scholarship, but a grant. Didn't have to pay it back, just got to go, could pick where I wanted to as long as I was accepted. Well, at that time, I was playing in a rock band, just both as a junior and senior in high school, as well as my first year in college. And I decided I better stay local because I want to keep playing, do a little bowling. And like freshman students even today, I didn't really put my whole heart into that college experience as far as academics were concerned. The result was at the end of that first year, our band had a breakup because 2 of them weren't able to keep their grades up enough to continue. And I was able to, and spent the next year getting my grade point up to at least the C so that I could stay in school. And then I transferred to South Dakota State University in my 3rd year. And at that point, I settled back into being a student. One of the nice things about going someplace where no one knew you was I could do things that maybe I wouldn't have done in Rapid City. And one of those was I was a cheerleader at SDSU. In high school, I was doing a lot of what was called tumbling and acrobatics. And as a cheerleader, all you had to do was a few backflips and handstands. And that was a piece of cake for me. So I was a cheerleader at SDSU, and that really opens up, what college is like and how people see you. And once again, didn't see Indian people in the things that I was doing. But the BIA required us to get together for a monthly dinner that was held at, once again, the Episcopal Church in Brookings, South Dakota. And I got to meet maybe 13 other Indian students, many of whom were not from South Dakota, but from other places. Graduating, I became an elementary teacher in the Rapid City School District. And then the district had a federal grant where they were able to start a program, and it was called the American Indian Resource Center. They had a whole bunch of money to buy materials, books, films, items. And I was hired as there were only two of us, as the American Indian Resource Teacher. My job at that time was to read as many of those books as you could, try to figure out what all these items were so you could make presentations and go into the schools in the Rapid City school system and share this information. It's like, when you think about it, it's kind of like a dream job. You get to just hang out and be in this library, almost as if you were a librarian, going through, and we were making up annotated bibliography, as many of the books as we could. This new career option basically changed my life. And I had pretty much said for many, many decades that I was born again Indian in 1974 when I took that position. All the Indian things of my past started to connect to my present. And essentially, that's the basis of what I do today, started then in 1974. In the 1980s, it was an era of tokenism and required minority representation. As a teacher in the South Dakota Education Association, I was a representative from the Rapid City teachers. And at that time, NEA required all states to have minority representation equaling 20% of the number of teachers in the state. And I didn't really understand what all that meant, but we were at the 1977, I think, in Minneapolis for an NEA convention, and there was a mix-up on the rooms, and we'd driven there, so it wasn't a big deal, and I was just thinking, well, shoot, that's just too much of a hassle, and this was my first time being at a national organization, I thought, as a delegate, and I thought, well, I don't need this. This is just a hassle, so I was going to go home. And all of a sudden, within 15, 20 minutes, one of the other members of our delegation came up to me and said, hey, we found you a room. I said, really? I thought there weren't any rooms. They said, no, we found you one. And literally, I am so hard-headed and stupid sometimes. It was about a year before I figured out that if I didn't stay, that delegation wouldn't be seated at the National Education Association convention. The tokenism and representation was so strong that if they didn't have 20%, which in South Dakota only amounted like two teachers, they couldn't vote at the national level. So from that point on, I found myself kind of groomed and solicited for positions, and eventually I moved from teaching to state administration and was hired as the Director of Indian Education for the South Dakota Department of Education and Cultural Affairs, and I was that position from 1980 to 1990. This was also the period when the term downsizing kind of was invented in the mid-'80s. And every time somebody left in our organization, I inherited their job. So by 1988, I was the Indian Education Director for the state of South Dakota, the Gifted and Talented Director, the Social Studies Director, the Fine Arts Director, and the Youth at Risk Coordinator. And each of these programs required me to travel, predominantly to Washington, D.C., or usually to Denver. So I was flying the whole decade to the point where I got tired of it. And I've had my fill, and I've been satisfied with that. Personal choices had me moving to Iowa in 1990. And what I find in Iowa is easy to be Indian here in Iowa. Iowa is very open and receptive to minorities. Iowa is looking for minority participation in a whole variety of ways. And the minority community itself, it was small, but it's very social and very diverse. There are people from all over the world here, which is one of the organizations I work with called Culture All, where we're called ambassadors. We go into classrooms and talk about our culture. Well, there are people from about 40 to 60 different countries, many of them immigrants who are here in Iowa. They may be the only one from Ghana, or there may be a small number of them who are tie-down, which is not true, actually. There's a large tie-down population here. but let's say from like Nepal. I only know of 2 families from Nepal. But the fact that they're even in Iowa is just pretty amazing to me. And so I continue to do those kind of things where I interact with the minority people here. So from teacher and administrator in Des Moines Public Schools, I found numerous opportunities to talk and teach about Indian people, including my current activities with Simpson College. And here I am now, retired, and I'm still talking about Indians. So growing up Indian, I was proud to be Dakota. I was proud to be Indian. And I continue to be proud to share information about Indian people with you like I am tonight. So I'm going to move on. I'll take a little short break here. Let Gladys see if there's anybody that has a question.
I got 2 questions for you. First one is, what instrument did you play in the band?
Oh, it was a guitar. I still do, but you know, the fingers aren't like they used to be. So, but no, I still have a couple of, actually I have 4 guitars. So.
Oh, wow. Okay. And then the other question was, are there any Indian reservations in Iowa or other Indian communities?
No, there are Indian communities on the western side of the state near Sioux City, which has a fairly high population of Indian people, mostly Dakota. There are 2 fairly, well, medium-sized reservations in Nebraska that are on the border with Iowa. So there's actually 3 Indian casinos in that part of the state, but they're not technically Iowan. There's only 1 tribe that is in Iowa today. They're called the Meskwaki, and they don't live on a reservation. There's a legal term called settlement because they actually got permission to move from, I think it was Kansas at some point, and back in the 1840s, or yeah, I think the 1840s. So they live on a settlement pretty much in the center of the state, about, I'm thinking 50 miles from Des Moines. And we're going to talk about them just a tiny bit. They're my example when I talk about casinos, which we'll talk about later tonight. Okay. So that's the only tribe in Iowa.
And I'll just get in one last one. Was the man in the photo with your mother your grandfather, the man in the headdress?
I don't know. Part of it is photos were usually taken in not until like the 1920s. And because Indian tribes and Indian people were subjugated in the late 1800s and definitely by 1890, and there were very, very few photographs prior to that. So most of the photographs you see are staged. And I've never heard my mom mention a grandparent. Her dad was nobody that I'd ever met, but she never said that that person was. And that person is wearing what I would call stereotypical attire for a grandfather kind of person. So at this point, I don't really know if that's a relative or not.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to move on to what's called a barrel model of culture. And I'm going to try to whiz through this because there's a lot more important things, I would say. So how do you study Indian people? Well, we imagine a culture located in a specific period of time, in a specific environment, with specific resources, many times unique resources available, and a specific climate. So you've got a period of time, a special period of time, an environment with specialized resources, and a climate. That's where the barrel model of culture, it's a big barrel and it just sits there. It sits there in this environment, in this climate, and in this period of time. And that barrel model of culture has 3 parts to it: superstructure, social structure, and infrastructure. This is my drawing, thank you. It has the 3 components. It looks like a big barrel: superstructure at the top, social structure in the middle, infrastructure. And this barrel sits in a particular time, in a particular place. So the infrastructure, which is this part at the bottom, that determines what kind of work the culture is done in the culture, what kind of foods we eat, what our shelter looks like, the kind of clothes we wear, because of what's available. So you have to think about, well, if you live in a place where there's a forest, your homes are going to look a lot different than people who live in a desert, people who live near the ocean. All these things are going to be different and affect the kind of food you eat, the shelter you live in, and the kind of clothes you wear. So it's all based on a period of time. Are we talking about 1,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, 150 years ago? All the resources that are available to that culture, and the climate, how that impacts it. Is it a temperate climate? Do they have tornadoes, hurricanes, droughts, etc.? Those are all factors that impact every culture. The social structure of the culture determines who does what job, how families maintain relationships, and these include the customs and traditions for things like dating, marriage, and child rearing, and includes education. The superstructure, that's the ideas, beliefs, and values of that culture. It says how are they passed on, how are they enforced. It gives a sense of identity and makes sense of the world for the culture and the people who are there. And there are laws that govern behavior, and the superstructure determines how they're enforced. In any culture, the enforcement of those and compliance to these laws can include killing. You violate it to the point where it's not acceptable, you will just be killed because you can. So a culture has to determine what are those values, ideas, beliefs that break that barrier, that mean you can't even be part of it and have to be killed. So these three components are interrelated, integrated, and inseparable. What impacts one impacts the other two. Changes in environment or climate can impact all three. There's a great dependency on culture to protect, understand, and adapt to any change that can impact any parts of the barrel model. So when we take this barrel model and then we talk about American Indians, we put them into anthropologically into cultural study areas, CSA. So for the most part, it's easiest to study American Indians just as you learned in grade school, to put them in 8 geographic locations. And then you just take those 300 tribes we mentioned last week and divvy them up among these 3 locations. So they're going to be unequally divvied up because some locations can hold more population and capacity for carrying more people than others. And those 8 cultural study areas are the Northwest Coast, California, the Plateau, Great Basin, Southwest Plains, Northeast Woodlands, and Southeast Woodlands. Northwest Coast, as we talk about, I'm going to come back to that, sorry. When using CSAs to study Indian people, we have to understand it matters what time period is being used. When we talk about cultural traditions, behaviors, and events, whether it's 500, 5,000 years ago makes a big difference than what Indian people do today. And if you try to lump everything together as one thing, then it either becomes romanticized, the stereotype, or just pure misinformation or wrong. So I'm going to give you some clumps of information on each of the CSAs. This is the fast version. Northwest Coast. They are essentially around, and I'm going to use cities that people hopefully will understand, because you could be geographically challenged, and Ohio and Iowa are the same thing to you. So I'll try to put cities, which gives you a sense of where we're at. Northwest Coast, Seattle, Portland, Vancouver. The Indian tribes that live there are quite small, probably numbering under 1,000 in membership, but there are quite a few of them. I'm going to say a couple dozen. They're the only tribes in America that make totem poles. That's one of the unique things about them. There are no other tribes in America that make totem poles, just tribes in the Northwest Coast. They're heavily dependent on salmon, but they have huge forests. They can make their homes out of planks of cedar, and so their homes look a little bit like cabins without the peaked roof. And that makes these people very unique among all the other tribes. Jump to California. We always think of California as just a little bit different than every place else. And even 1,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, that was probably true as well. One of the most peaceful places on the planet, considering there are probably 100 to 300,000 inhabitants in the sweet spot of California, between north of San Diego in that area. It was like a garden. We usually think of them as living in a garden. They didn't have to do anything. It was really laid back. So California is unique. Even today it is unique. The tribes were extremely small. A lot of them literally were exterminated after the gold rush period. Usually most exterminations of tribes occurred because of disease. There were never enough of them to serve as slaves, and that's why the Chinese were brought in to work on the railroads and everything else that was necessary in California, because there weren't enough Indians to do any of that kind of work. The Great Basin is kind of where Las Vegas, Death Valley is the extreme end of that. The Great Salt Flats, where they do all these racing and landing of the space shuttle when it has to land someplace other than Florida. So there's no water really, it's all aquifer kind of things. These people were the poorest of the poor among the tribal groups in America. And their ethos that is associated with them is, if it moves, it can probably be eaten. So they did eat things like grasshoppers and the big animals like rabbits and the occasional deer. That's what they subsisted on. And they're just the height of conservationists, their ability to know how to conserve their limited resources. It really shows in their history. The plateau, these are the tribes around Yellowstone. What's it called? The big mountain stuff up there. And so they live in these big mountains and these huge valleys. And they also had salmon, but they're able to kind of get out sections of the prairie and hunt bison as well. We think about them mostly because they had some notable people, including Chief Joseph, which is a whole nother study, if you wish. And the tribe names up there are kind of fun. Flathead, Walla Walla, Yakima, that sort of thing. And so we're going to find them in western Montana and northern Idaho, and those areas up in that part of the country. Southwest is the place where we have the largest populated tribe in America, and that's the Navajo. We also have within that, the boundaries of the Navajo Nation is one of the oldest tribes in America, called a Hopi, H-O-P-I. Their resources are limited to mud, so they got a lot of adobe structures. There are some tribes there that build their homes after structures they found just kind of sitting empty, which we now say belong to people that we don't even know, but we call them cliff dwellers. Those are not Indian people. Those are people that were present before Indian tribes. And when the tribes found these cliff dwellings vacant and just sitting empty with nobody around, they adopted some of the styles and started building homes that look similar. But they didn't move into the existing structures they found. That wasn't right. So the Pueblo people have taken, and as a heritage thing for them, making replicas in some cases, similar to what they found that were done by the cliff dwellers. The plains, of course, the huge, huge area in America, the whole center of America from west of the Mississippi to the Rocky Mountains, and from Texas all the way up into parts of Canada. The tribes there are a little bit bigger, not as big as the Navajo Nation, which is the biggest tribe, but tribes like ours, the one I belong to, the Dakota people, are there. Also Cheyenne, Crow, Pawnee, Arapaho, and bison was the main source of everything for the tribes in the plains. And then everything east of the Mississippi, all the way up into Canada, going east, all the way down to Louisiana, going east, It's such a big area that it's called the woodlands, but it's easiest to study them breaking them into northeast or southeast woodlands. And there's really distinct differences between the two. The northeast woodlands had really strong alliances that played a role in shaping how America became a country. And the southeast woodlands, they had options for a lot of growth, and they had a person there named Sequoia who developed the only alphabet in North Central South America that actually used letters that represented their sounds. So that's the fastest I can do cultural study groups. I'm going to continue on without taking questions right now because this one is shorter and is fun for us. So we're going to talk about cultural traditions and contributions. There are 5 slides here. These are 5 mostly food items, and they were known to Indian people except for one. One of the items here was brought by white people after white contact, after the discovery by Columbus. And that particular food they had never seen before. This also means that white people had never seen 4 of these foods before. That was new to them. So make your best guess, which one did white people bring? Corn, tomato, avocado, banana, or sweet potato? The correct answer is banana. So white people brought bananas. We never had them before, but they never heard of corn, tomato, avocado, or sweet potato. Make your choice in this list. Which one did white people bring? Maple syrup, peaches, turkey, pumpkin, squash. One of these white people brought, the other 4 they never heard of before until white contact. The correct answer is peaches. Otherwise, white people never heard of maple syrup, even though there are maple trees throughout the world. I don't know why this was the only group that made maple syrup out of their sap. Turkey is unique to North America, pumpkin and squash. Number 3, coffee, cranberry, potato, bell peppers, peanut. Which one of these did white people give us? And which 4 had they never heard of before? The correct answer here is coffee. They brought coffee. We never heard of coffee, but they never heard of cranberry, potato, bell peppers, or peanut. 4th choice, bison, spinach, pineapple, blueberry, tapioca. What did white people give us? Bison, spinach, pineapple, blueberry, tapioca. The correct answer here is spinach. There's a lot of roots and leafy vegetables that are grown, but we did not have spinach. That was introduced to us after white contact. And number 5, cocoa, vanilla, pears, tobacco, Concord grapes. White people gave us one of these things, meaning that they never heard of the other 4 until they came here to North Central or South America. The correct answer here is pears. Otherwise, cocoa, vanilla, tobacco, and Concord grapes were not known in Europe at this time. So, how'd you do? Any comments?
I got 3 out of 5.
Hey, good for you. I'm impressed. Okay, I'm going to move on to tribal sovereignty, see if we can get through casinos. We want to revisit what we did in the first class, that the 3-prong approach that the Supreme Court seems to use. It's not a law, it's not a doctrine regarding tribal rights. If a right was not taken away by treaty, if a right was not given away by the tribe, if a right was not taken away by Congress, because Congress has plenary power, then the tribe retains the right. That tends to be the case. So there weren't many congressional laws before 1980s regarding casinos, and they seldom referenced tribes. At that time, it was pretty much Atlantic City and Las Vegas. So they weren't supposed to be any place else, and states were kind of limited in their ability to even have any kind of major gambling. The tribes had extremely limited instances of gambling included in treaties. So when you read the treaties, there's about 373 treaties. hardly any of them, it's rare that any of them included gambling or gaming in some manner. Tribes had no capacity to carry out gaming activities because they were extremely poor and depended on the BIA for economic support. So it didn't occur to the tribe that there may be a different way of getting income because they were poor, they weren't well educated. This is the 1980s, essentially 70s to 80s. There were very few high school graduates amongst the administration of most tribes. And as that started to grow, people were thinking, hey, maybe there's some other ways to do this. So the tribal capacity changed in the 1980s, and some tribes were already exercising their sovereign rights in different ways, and gambling just became an extension of the exercise of these rights. So the legal authorities were supporting the exercise of their gaming rights. That's because the Supreme Courts probably, if it had been brought to them, would have said, well, treaty didn't take it away, tribes didn't give it away, and Congress didn't say you can't do it. So tribes, that's just part of their sovereign rights to do gambling, and which we're going to call either gambling or gaming. But this comes at a cost of challenging or ignoring state laws. These challenges created the friction already existing between states and tribes over who has the authority over activities on property within state boundaries. States felt they could enforce all state laws on all property within state boundaries. However, tribes already had legal support for limited enforcement of state laws on tribal property, mainly because tribal property is often considered federal property, and states have no authority over federal property. The exercise of gaming rights started small, bingo. So they had higher payouts than churches, which were the only groups pretty much doing bingo. And these higher payouts were they were not in compliance with state law. They weren't supposed to be able to pay out these higher payouts. But once again, tribes are saying, no, we can do what we want. And then in the 1980s, tribes moved to actual casinos, which started basically with slots and then moved up to table games. In all instances, this happened in defiance of state laws that attempted to tax or control gambling within their boundaries. Congress tried to make both amends and support by passing the Indian Gaming and Regulatory Act in 1988. But it was kind of a little bit, not much and too late. And what happens is the gaming right required tribes and states to come to an agreement before a tribe could open a casino. So as you know, that casinos just seem to pop up all the time, and not as much now, but to get to the point where they are now, they were popping up just everywhere. So tribal casinos are not subject to state laws, only to federal laws. The older tribal casinos are kind of grandfathered in. Of the 300 tribes that we've talked about in part one, my guess is that only about 25 to 50 have successful casinos using a evaluation of they make money. Of the remainder, some of the tribes have no casinos, and a few of them have very small casinos. They're not really generating much income. But the top 10 to 25 tribes, they have amazing casinos. Some of the notable ones are Foxwoods and Mohegan Sun, both of them in Connecticut. You are familiar with Mystic Lake, Hinkley, Moloch Lakes. These are big, very successful casinos. And there's a whole bunch of other ones near Albuquerque, near Seattle, near Miami. So I'm going to finish with who owns all the hard rock cafes in the world. Has to do with casinos. Who owns all the hard rock cafes in the world? All of them. The answer is the Seminole Tribe in Florida. They bought all the hard rock cafes in 1997, and they paid $965 million for them. Their source of income, their casino earnings. There's a lot of money to be made in casinos, and the tribes, some of them, the very limited number that are doing well, are making a ton of money. The others, not so much. So tribal sovereignty is the exercise of sovereign rights. It's supported by congressional legislation. It has historical connections to treaties or the lack of those connections, and often the cause of significant friction between tribes and states in which reservations reside. There are many aspects of tribal authority and tribal sovereignty. This with casinos is just one of those. I'll take a short break here.
Well, we don't have any questions about the casinos, so.
Hey, good. Moving on. People, personalities, who do you know? So I always like to say, name a famous Indian personality that everybody knows is a positive role model and has lived in the past 50 years or is still living. So known to all means everyone knows who you're talking about, as in Joe Biden, Tiger Woods, Will Smith, Adele, Cher, Michelle Obama, Chuck Norris. Positive role model eliminates negative influencers, the infamous and the rumored. Living recently is even trickier. This eliminates all the chiefs of the Old West. Do you even know if Jay Silverheels is still alive? Because I know some of you know who Jay Silverheels is. Well, what about Russell Means or Chief Dan George? Do you have a name to offer? So as you think about this, I'm just going to tell you, no. Whatever name you have, nobody will know it. Not everybody will know it. There'll always be somebody that says, I don't know who that is. So I'm going to offer you some that are at least good enough to know. So I don't believe there's any Indian person known to all. I can only offer personalities that are positive, well-known among Indian communities or within their occupations, and generally deemed successful. So I'm going to give you these names: Sherman Alexie, Billy Mills, James Welsh, Graham Greene, Wilma Mankiller, Joy Harjo, John Harrington. And should you be interested, they're all worth looking up. Sherman Alexie is basically a writer, and one of the best movies in the world is one he wrote. Shoot, can't think of it right now, but it'll come to me. And Billy Mills, he's the only American to win a gold medal in the 10,000 meters in the Olympics in 1964. There has never been before or since an American who's won a gold medal in the 10,000 meters. James Welsh is a fantastic author. Graham Greene is in a lot of movies, and if you saw his face, you'd say, oh, I know that guy. If you're into Red Green, he's the guy that always wants to blow stuff up. Wilma Mankiller was the first female elected principal chief of the Oklahoma Cherokee. Joy Harjo. Joy Harjo is a poet laureate. She's an incumbent one, but she was the first American Indian to be a poet laureate. And John Harrington is a member of the Chickasaw Nation. That's a tribe, and he's an astronaut. And these are all people worth knowing about. So American people are still in that first stage. We're the first, it's the first Indian to do this, the first Indian to do that. We have many areas where we have had no representation, and we're still struggling with recognition and access. Not everybody knows who we are. And some of this, and most of it, if nothing else, is due to poverty on reservations. And I hope to address the poverty later. I do want to talk about Dakota Nation breakdown and using the Dakota tribe just as an example, but nearly all tribes are divided into parts. This will help us understand how these distinctions can lead to misunderstandings or confusion of terms, but they all have meaning to tribal members. So the key here is nearly all tribes have parts. Let me say like 98% have parts. So here's the Dakota Nation. We're called Dakota. Our nickname is Sioux because the French fur traders didn't know we were named Dakota, so they made up a name. It's a made up name, it doesn't mean anything. And we think of it as a nickname. But if you say Sioux, you really mean us, the Dakota people. We're broken into 7 council fires, and those 7 council fires are broken into 3 divisions. So the Santee Division, the Middle Division, the Western Division, and then the 7 council fires, Mid-Wacaton, Wapakute, Wahpeton, Sisseton. Middle divisions, Yankton A, Yankton, and the Western Division is Teton. There are so many people in the Teton Western Division, they get broken down 7 more times. The largest of this Teton bunch are the Oglala, the Sichangu, that's the group I belong to, Hunkpapa, Minikaju, Itazipko, Ohoenupa, and Sihasapa. You may have noticed that you mentioned in some of the land things that you were talking about earlier that Gladys was sharing, Mid-Wacaton and Wahpeton. These are Santee Division people that live on the eastern part of, north and eastern part of South Dakota. And Midwankiton are actually part of the tribe that is involved in Mystic Lake. So the concern that needs to be understood and is understood by Indian people who are Dakota is that these three divisions speak with different dialects. They all speak Dakota, but if you're Santee division, you speak with the D. So if you say the word Washday, which means good, it's generic, Washday, and you're a Santee division member, you say Dita Washday if you want to say very good. Dita Washday. The minute you say Dita, somebody knows that you're a Santee division person. If you're middle division, and there's hardly any middle division tribal members left, you speak with an N. So you say Nakota, and you say Nina Washday. The minute you say Nina, we know that you're a middle division. Well, the Western Division has all the people. They speak with an L. You say Lila Washday. Well, you're a Lakota speaker. Because there's so many Lakota speakers, you start hearing that term Lakota being applied to all Dakota people, and that's simply not correct. It only applies to the Western Division members of the Teton who speak with the L dialect. This kind of a breakdown is true for pretty much every tribe in America. And if you want to learn more about them, you have to learn all the breakdown of that group. The Navajo, the Cherokee, the Hopi, they all are broken down into these groups. The Pueblo Indians, for example, there are 19 different Pueblos. And even within the 19, some of them are broken down even more. So I'm getting close to the end. I just want to do eagle feathers and star quilts. So as we talk about which eagle, why use them? Symbolic imagery. We use the golden eagle. There's more feathers. It's they're not as big as bald eagles, and bald eagles can hurt you. It's easier to kill a golden eagle because you have to do it with your bare hands. So why do you use feathers? Each feather represents an acknowledged deed, event, or action. So feathers are earned one at a time. No one gives them to you. You have to go get your own eagle feathers. Symbolic imagery. They're meaningful. This is the drawing of what would be a design of eagle feather. If you put them together, you would get a partial circle, or if you put them all together, you get a full circle. So this is called a feathered circle, and you can see the individual eagle feathers. So it's like a little headdress. If you painted that same design on a hide or quilt, it would be called a star pattern. And then it simply meant that these got transitionalized into star quilts. So the old design got transferred into a diamond shape that got sewn together, and star quilts essentially represent a headdress, a symbol of honor and respect. You end up with a star quilt. For Indian people, especially among plains and woodland tribes, this is a headdress. This is special. We give those to people because we want to honor or respect them. So we've looked at quill work, eagle feathers, and star quilts, and that's the end of this part. I recognize librarians are the best resources, so I would like you to limit your, when you're going to look at something, to .gov.org.edu, and then I give you 3 options: the Bureau of Indian Affairs, National Museum of the American Indian, and National Congress of American Indians. And then if you want to contact me at Fracek@q.com.